I grew up in San Antonio, on the south side of San Antonio, in a community that I would call Mexican and Mexican American. My mother still lives in the house that I grew up in, and so it's a very close-knit community. My mother does not speak English. She has 8 children. She's 104, but she still doesn't speak English. And so I grew up in a home where Spanish was the language of the home. I didn't realize actually till I was in about the 3rd grade that my father actually spoke English, because he required that we speak Spanish at home out of respect for my mother. And when I was in the 3rd grade, we got a phone, and the phone rang, and this man says, "May I speak to your mother?" And I said, "I'm sorry, sir, my mother doesn't speak English." And he said, "Well, that's okay, mija, this is your dad." And so all of a sudden I realized that even though Spanish was the language of the home, that my father spoke English, and my mother, with 8 kids, had enough comprehension of English that we really couldn't get away with anything like we tried to speaking English in front of them, thinking they didn't understand. But I went to school at a time when speaking Spanish was discouraged. In elementary school, we would have to write lines, "I will speak English in this class." When I was in high school, you could get expelled for speaking Spanish on the school ground. I couldn't take Spanish because I'm old enough to have gone to school before we had Spanish for native speakers available. So because I spoke Spanish, I couldn't take Spanish classes. I could take German, but for a kid on the south side of a low-income community, that didn't seem to make any sense. I realize now it would have helped. So I didn't take Spanish, and when I went to college, I had a deficient transcript because I didn't have a foreign language. And so I was going to be required to take 2 semesters of Spanish. Fortunately, I tested out of it. So all of my education was in English. I became obviously English dominant because schooling was in English. I've retained my bilingualism because of my family context. And so it really wasn't until I became a professional that I came to realize that I had been socialized by a system to think that there was something deficient about the fact that you spoke a language other than English. And so I've been thankful to have had the opportunity to work in the bilingual education field, to really come full circle and recognize that bilingualism is something to be celebrated, that culture is who you really are. So I'm a professional by training, and I have a professional culture, but I'm also that kid from the deep south side of San Antonio, proud to be a Mexican American, proud to have parents that did teach us Spanish and retained the culture and allowed us to move across a variety of cultural contexts and to be successful in those contexts.